Alright, here we go to Luke's game. Luke has been on the show a bunch, and this is an interesting game also about space. So an odd move. D5 is fine here. C4 arguably is giving black what he wants after E5. Check to the miserable king. Knight D2. Knight E7. Knight F3. E4. A3. Wow. Next level chess, right? Very nice move, A3. So we get rid of our problem. And I thought this was a real interesting position. I want to say I believe in white here. And actually, I didn't plan it this way, but we're going to talk about the unopposed dark square bishop by all means right now. And that bishop, right, it seems like it should give white an advantage here. So E3, D6, B4. That seems like, it seems all natural development from the opening. I didn't see anything wrong from either side there. Knight G6, bishop V2, and now black goes for it. And I get it, but I'm not sure it's right. He plays F4. Makes what I'm going to call an instructive mistake, but like a couple moves in the Vishnu game, I think if you turn on the computer might not agree with me, but I think on a practical level, I feel pretty strong about it. So Luke took on F6, and he's going to play to win the pawn on E4. As he notes, though, he loses the initiative after this. Part of the question, though, is like, well, what do we think about the position? Who do we think is better? And I definitely want to say that I believe in white, and one of the reasons I believe in white is that that bishop on B2 is so strong, and we have a small development lead, and maybe our king could conceivably be better. Still, you know what to do, and I think EF is plausible. I think bishop D4 is plausible. Bishop D4 is maybe the most human thing to do, and then you could take on F4 and then bring your bishop back to E3. I don't want to part with the bro on B2 because, yeah, he's this unopposed goddess over here, and he's just killing people. So anyways, like I said, maybe not a terrible move because we do win a pawn, and we get to centralize the queen. But now we have to suffer for it a little bit. Okay. Now, maybe EF's an inaccuracy, but we all understand that why it happened. And right, like you see this position, and you say to yourself, yeah, maybe not an advantage for white, and maybe the kind of situation where an accident could happen. It feels a little bit like a Marshall position, for example. A Marshall Gambit position. Okay. So, very spicy moves. And black has played well, and we're in trouble. Right? White is in trouble. And now we're going to go into, let's call it phase 2 of the game, where white is going to have to try to save himself. Rook E6. And knight G5 and the F2 pawn is obviously the problem. Okay, so rook F2, queen takes, rook takes, king takes. And I spent a little bit of time here thinking about it. And my sense is that white should be lost. Maybe it's not, maybe not the easiest thing to do, but that white should be lost. And the simple reason is the extra pawn is going to mean a lot, and the coordination of the rooks is going to be the critical question. Can white achieve the coordination of the rooks and, secure his king somehow? Now, that said, it is an interesting decision from black right now. Do you want to take and then take on H2, or do you want to go back and the knight F7? And the more I thought about it, I thought Luke's opponent played a great move with knight F7. Really fantastic. because he's avoiding taking on h2 right away, and his knight's going to be a beast on e5. So exclam move. I think white's totally lost. Knight takes c4, and now you're going to see black plays some great moves, totally keeping things under control here. And my explanation for what comes next is that white felt like he had done the heavy lifting already, and that the game was essentially over. Now he just had to push his pawns. And that's mostly actually true, but he fails to take care and is punished. And I think we've all been there, and I think the way I describe it just emotionally is that black has played what in his mind are some great moves, and they were, like the move knight f7 to e5. Congratulations, that took a lot of power to play it. Spiritual energy or energy in general, whatever you want to call it, right? But now he loses the thread and is punished brutally by Luke here. It's hard to imagine that white could lose this game. King g5. And now he's actually getting himself in a little trouble. At any point, he could have avoided the rooks penetrating like this. And queen b2 is a losing move. He had to play something like g5, and now it's over. Check this out. We snip. Now there's no check on c3, and that's it. This is from the Polgar Mate in 2 book. And Luke writes, he's done for. That's right. All right, now we're going to move on. That was our let's call it our section on space. And now we're going to do 2 Carlsbad structure games. So, and both from pretty strong players that we've seen on the show before. And the first is Cam Leslie. And I love this move order for white. And I don't know if I've ever really seen this bishop g4 thing before myself. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I suppose the idea is after, say, f3 to play bishop h5 and g6. Getting rid of, spending some time to get rid of that bishop. But it's not convincing to me, especially because, the main idea with this f3 move is that we're going to dominate the knight, and we're going to then make you think about e4. But the first things first, we want to dominate the knight. Okay, now, one cool thing about this game and the following game, which is Door's game, is that in Door's game, he's black, and he's playing against the person who put the knight on f3, which I think is a little bit less dynamic. A little bit of history. This is the system that Kasparov, it happened before Kasparov, but Kasparov really showed how dynamic it could be in the 80s, and I did a little video on my YouTube channel called Carlsbad for Vishnu, where I talked about this setup for our very own Vishnu, who's off. We did his game at the beginning of the show. And then I used it myself. I've decided this is the way I want to play as white. And so in my Road to 2500 series, I also covered a game with this very position. So bishop g4, and this is a funny thing about learning opening theory. Let's read what Cam writes here. Queen b3. He says, I knew from my opening book that queen b3 was the recommended move, but in retrospect, I wish I had played f3 or knight g2 instead. Right? And here, because what happens is he tricks himself, and the trick will help us, I think, understand a lot about what white is trying to do in this position. So apparently the opening books tell him that after queen b6 he should go back to queen c2, which to me is just totally weird. Why would you do this little dance? It's too complicated for me. But in any case, the problem for black in this opening is lack of space and central squares. So in general, what you are trying to do is to squeeze the guy, and trading pieces and queens is not going to help. And in particular, in this case, when white took, I'm going to call that a very bad move, because now the rook is open as well. And black, black is definitely no. I'd rather be black. We'll put it that way. I'd rather be black Okay, so with one move, we've lost a lot of the distinctive advantages of the white position here. Knight g2, b5, fine. f3, and now let's say black's next coming plans I don't get. He plays bishop d7. I didn't understand that move. I don't understand why we wouldn't put it to e6, and then we can start dreaming about moves like knight d7 to b6, and we can hit him with b4 and all that other good stuff later. So I didn't understand that. That makes sense to me. And that didn't, was controversial, let's say. But let's just say he's created this situation for himself where the knight does need to get out, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to go to a6. It wanted, I thought, to do something like that. So these are problems that black created for himself. This move g5, Cam didn't remark on, but to me it just seemed totally wrong. In so many of these positions, the bishop wants to go back to f2. And when you look at the old Kasparov games, you know, c5 is, of course, a thing that black can play for. But if I get to put my bishop on f2, it's kind of cool. I get to hold on to the d4 square, and I'm perfectly situated. So I think the interesting mistake for black's mind was he was saying something to himself about how he was worried about this doubling of the pawns. Now, first of all, there's an intermezzo with bishop e3, but just pretend for a moment that there is none. I don't think I want to give up that bishop like that. Pawns aren't people. You know, there's a guy. I got the dark squares is the most important thing. The square in front of the isolated pawn, of course, is the most important, and of course, this is a juicy one too. So this is a loss of time and gives white potential squares. This one on f5 and maybe a lever later with h4. Okay, knight e5, knight c4. I thought this was an interesting position. I believe in white here, though it's definitely complicated. And I feel like black has made some crimes. Now, one thing we should stress, I think, is that this knight is his best piece. And so if we can just get rid of the thing, I think we're in business. And so rook c1 makes a lot of sense to me. If he wants the pawn, he can have the pawn. And I think we've got a nice position. This felt a little passive. And g4 just felt totally wrong to me. Interestingly, Cam gave this an exclam, but I didn't understand. To my mind, black is playing for the central squares and for d4. And g4, I don't think it does much of anything. He gave that a question mark too, but honestly, I don't get it. Like, why does this help black? Bishop f3 seemed fine. It also seemed fine what Cam did. Check the miserable king. Yeah, and Cam's talking about bishop h3 here. Maybe. I'm not certain about bishop h3 either. But okay, I understand the grief. But white is obviously fine here. He does his fanciness, and now we're going to get him bam. And what is happening? Cam's winning, and I'm sure this was a time scramble situation all of a sudden where Cam now blows. I've done this myself. Blows it with rook d1, needs to play something like bishop e7. And now the game, unfortunately, is going to go, you'd think, into a draw. But something hilarious happens here. Let's read this, what Cam writes. This is an instructive moment. I was discussing time pressure with my fellow chess players at the tournament, and many were saying to play fast when your opponent is in time pressure to catch them. And where did we see that recently? We saw MVL playing in Grishuk's time pressure and missing his momentous chance. The dude would be on +3 right now. He'd be winning the candidates tournament. But, you know, I was thinking about it afterwards, and I did a little video on I wish I had said it. It's very easy to say don't play in your opponent's time pressure. And let's just be clear. The reason that the time advantage is valuable is that you have time to cook up something that your opponent can't deal with. The guy's not going to lose on time. He's just going to make bad moves. But if you're moving just as fast, it's obvious your moves are probably just going to be just as bad. But psychologically, when you see that clock ticking down to 0 and you just want to slam the guy out, it's such a dream that if I can make a contemporary metaphor for us, right, that they tell you not to touch your face now because of the virus, but everyone's still touching their face. It's kind of impossible not to touch your face, right? So everybody's touching their face, and they even if you can tell yourself not to touch your face, but it's very hard not to do it. And I think it's also very hard not to play in your opponent's time pressure. Luckily, though, Cam thought about it, and bam, hit him with that. And now all of a sudden, it's not so pleasant for a peasant. F5 might not be his best chance, and black just falls head into it here. I don't think it was actually lost, but now it is. Done. Okay, beautiful. They said C5 is a crime. That's right. Patient Chess says, this is a line from Dangerous Weapons, the Queen's Gambit from Every Man. The bishop g4 thing. Okay. All right. Now, let's, wait a second. Funnily enough, Door's game has a very similar ending, rook endgame, and I almost said to myself, oh no, I loaded the wrong game. All right. So, Door has just taken up this Queen's Gambit declined himself, and interestingly notes that he learned it on the Chessable course. I want to say I tried it out. Fabi tried it out once too. It is a very difficult thing to do. Jan Elvist, famous Estonian GM, told me once when I tried it, he said, and he beat me hard about it, he said that in order to play it, you really have to be kind of a specialist. And that is, like, you really have to go deep into all of these different lines. And that's not something I'm very good at. But it's not to say you shouldn't do it, and there's definitely a lot of merit to playing this way. And I will say that if you play the move order you just did, let's go back to this move order. What you're avoiding is the move order that Cam got in the last game with being able to put the knight on e2 and use the f-pawn as part of your struggle. And that's a real key point when we come and look at this game here. I played this kind of thing as white many, many times when I was a kid, though I didn't usually take on d5. I just mean I had the knight on f3. And I found it very difficult when playing against the strong Soviet players that really their pawns are looking this way, so they want to attack the king, and the knight e4 jump at some point will create grief in the center. And so having the pawn on f3 really works against that. Now, you mentioned bishop f5. I think what you did is fine, but I don't like bishop e6, even though I'm sure that's like a theoretical move. The simple way that I can recommend, Dora, that you play this thing is like castles, e3, knight e4. And you have a very interesting position, let's say snip and takes, where the guy isn't going to knock you from e4, and you're going to, develop your pieces however they need to be developed, depending on what white does. And the bummer here for white is, like, it's very hard for him to use his extra center pawn, and a lot of times they might come at you with some lame b4, b5 thing, but in the meantime, you can be mating the guy on the other side of the board. That's my general, not only my understanding, but my experience of having been on the white side of a lot of these positions. Okay, so this is the way it went down. A6, I want to say, is too deep for me. I know that some players have played this similar things in similar situations, but especially since B4 isn't happening anytime soon, I don't understand what A6 is about. I assume it's about C5, but it's a little too deep. Why wouldn't you just castle, for example? Okay, so interesting position. I think white's a little bit better. He does this interesting trade-off, and let's just say the general dynamic. White would like to trade off the minors and have a heavy middle game / end game where we pound the d pawn. And so he's close to getting that, so we got to say he's a little bit better, but it's nothing terrible yet. In fact, the isolated queen pawn is a real nice practical thing in this situation. Even though you were critical, Dora, of a lot of the moves you made, I was mostly okay with it. Fine. All this is fine. And yeah, I wasn't thrilled with knight f6, but actually I would say there's a great game. I always get the numbers of the games wrong. I'm going to guess it's Tal Botvinnik number 9 from 1960, which is a similar setup in a lot of ways, or it evolves into a similar setup. And there, right, you can see from that there's so many tactics, and your computer spat out queen f6 to you, and right, that's the kind of wild stuff that's hidden underneath the position. It's not just this, of course. It's not just touching the most important square on the board, but you're threatening garbage like knight f2 and queen f4. So yeah, there's all kinds of juice in this position left, and black is the one, especially if he can keep this dark square bishop, that you've got a lot of fun on your hands. And unfortunately, here in the next couple moves, white achieves a lot of his dreams by being able to do this. Okay, now clearly you had some of your own ideas when you played this g5. I didn't like it because, well, two reasons. You're aiming to give up your beautiful bishop, and you gave him this square. My sense of this position is that white is close to strategically winning, but you did present him with some interesting problems with g4. And for sure now, the guy should play queen c2. For sure. Be looking at that f5 square. Make things real difficult. Yeah, I think white's great after queen c2. I didn't understand what he wanted, and you came after him, and now it's interesting. King g2, knight f3, rook c7. And now, Dor, I want to yell at you, okay? I want to yell at you for this a little bit. I'm not really the guy to yell, but if you appreciate my yelling here, I think it might do you good. You have the king in a terrible spot there on g2. And what we can say is that your king is better than his king. And I also want to say that your knight is better than his knight. Obviously, white hasn't done himself a favor in the last couple moves. But what you did here is you released the tension in a very bizarre way here. And if you just held it, play some move like king g7, you're putting immense pressure onto the white position. You could even, if you want to get fancy, you can play knight e1 and to d3 because he can't take the knight. But more to the point is, like, white's not doing anything in this position, and your knight on f3, well, that's a beautiful knight. No one can argue with that knight. That thing's amazing. So when you take this thing, I mean, it's really sad because you're not even winning a pawn, right? And now white gets his counterplay, and I don't know, king fixes itself. And we get a mess, but white is just holding the game. So that's the move to yell at you about. 30 lashes, you know, of however many, whatever you like to say to yourself when you lash yourself. I think that's a thing to say.